Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Well, Medieval Church History, I'm Teresa Holman, and with me is Father Michael Witt. Welcome, Father.
Thank you, Teresa.
It's good to be here for show number 9.
Number 9.
And we are studying the Muslims and the Magyars today, right?
That's right. That's right. We've so far seen that the Carolingians were not able to keep themselves together.
Right.
Now the chickens are coming home to roost.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be looking at 2 of the 3 invasions that will be making mincemeat of Europe. One of those being the Muslims coming in basically from the south to the Mediterranean, and then the Magyars, Hungarians, coming in from the west. And then later on, we'll wait a couple weeks. I want to give some background on especially the Muslims, where they came from and why. But later on, we'll take a look at the Vikings coming in from the north. And all 3 of these are, in the end, irresistible. And so it just is a mess for the Europeans. If they thought that they were a mess when the German tribes came through and destroyed the Roman Empire in the west,
ain't seen nothing yet, huh?
Nothing, yeah, right. But the good news behind all of this is that the Europeans this time around make an accounting of themselves. They do not roll over and play dead. They fight back, and they do so in very creative ways. And also you have a lot of church leadership not sitting back and letting this happen, but rather going out and converting. Right. And at least 2 of the 3 groups will be converted to Christianity. The Magyars and the Vikings will be.
Too bad we didn't get a perfect score there.
No. But in baseball, it would.
That would have been still pretty good percentage, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well, let's start in right away and take a moment in time. The year is 722, and there is an army, a Muslim army, marching its way through northern Spain, through the Iberian Peninsula, in the northernmost part. There is the object of this army is a very small strip of land that runs between the sea at the north and then a series of mountains called the Cantabrian Mountains. So it's a strip of only about 30 miles wide, if you can imagine. And this is it. This is the toehold that Christianity has left in all of the Iberian Peninsula. There is a Christian up in that area. He comes from his tribe, I guess you could say, is called Asturian. They believe that they're descendants from the Visigoth Germans that had conquered that part of Europe, in Spain, and had settled there. And this man rallies the defenders in this little 30-mile strip to do what they can to try to fend off this Muslim army. And there's a battle that takes place. It's a little town called Covadonga. And there, this man named Palejo actually scores a victory.
All right.
And with that little tiny strip of land becomes the launching pad for a 700-year campaign known as the Reconquista.
Wow.
Now, from the Muslim perspective, this was only a little setback. They'd had so many successes, which we'll take a look at, and this was a relatively minor backwater setback. They thought, little did they know, that from the Christian point of view, this was the turning point at the moment of extinction. Now you begin the change. But shortly after then, the governor of Spain, which is a Muslim province at this time, a caliphate, his name is Anbasa. He sent yet another detachment, but this time the army that he sent did not go to that region that I had mentioned before, Asturia. Instead, it went to the west, and it crossed over the Pyrenees Mountains. Now, that's a very difficult mountain range. But they succeed in crossing over that, coming down into the French side, the Frankish side, and go after the first city of any size that they could see there, and that's the town or the city of Carcassonne. It's in southern France today.
Okay.
Okay. And then from there, they continued marching further north, all the way up to the French city in the interior of France called Autun. So they've had quite a bit of success. Anbasas is killed in one of the raids, and so he then is succeeded by an even more aggressive leader. His name is Abd al-Rahman. And here he comes in contact with a Frankish army, and he defeats them.
Okay.
Okay. So get this impression, get this picture here, that the only thing left of Christianity in the Iberian Peninsula is this tiny little Asturian strip, okay, up along the coastline. And now in Christian France, the Frankish kingdom, now this is before Charlemagne, by the way. Okay, we're going back in time a bit.
700s. Okay.
Yeah, in the 700s. And he defeats, Al-Rahman defeats a Christian army and then goes to the city of Bordeaux and sacks Bordeaux.
Oh my. Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, we're talking pillage here. This is terrible. People are set to the sword. They're murdered. Their houses are burned down. Women are raped and taken to be sold into slavery. Children are murdered, raped, sold into slavery. This is a terrible thing that's happening. And then he then turns around and destroys the shrine of Saint Hilary.
Wow. Okay.
Now he is beginning a campaign of marching his raiding army through southern France, destroying some of the churches and shrines and memorials of some of the. Remember, there are some really great early church fathers from this area.
Yes.
Well, Hilary of Poitiers,
Right.
An example of that. Ignatius of Lyon. Lyon is not too far away from this. And so he's going through ravaging this, and the one area, the next shrine he decides to take on is that of St. Martin of Tours.
Wow.
Again, one of these earlier church fathers from the patristics. So he marches to Tours, and keep in mind that he is only 120 miles from Paris. And as he's going ravaging around. Now, late October of 732, he reaches the area of Poitiers, okay, and Tours is his destination. And so a battle takes place. It's sometimes called the Battle of Tours, or it's also referred to as the Battle of Poitiers. And on October 25th of 732, Al-Rahman, Abd al-Rahman, pulls his army together, and he is confronted by a Frankish army. Now, this army is almost entirely cavalry.
Okay.
And these are Frankish noblemen, okay, who have been rallied together by a Carolingian by the name of Charles the Hammer, Charles Martel.
Mm-hmm.
And what he did was he called together all of these Franks, these Frankish noblemen, and said, bring your horse, bring all your armor, and bring your sword and your spear. We've got work to do. And he gathers these several hundred men together. And so they are the only thing that stood between the Muslim army and Tours, which he was going to destroy the same way he did the shrine of St. Hilary and the city of Bordeaux and Carcassonne before that. And so the Arabs feel that they have everything on their side. The day that they attack is the 100th anniversary of the death of the Prophet Muhammad. So it's a great anniversary for them. And they begin lining their troops up to attack. Okay, they've been victorious everywhere they've gone. Why not now? Except they're really cold. There had been a cold snap in late October of that year, and it's really cold. And they've just come over into
Mountains.
France from North Africa, from Spain, and they're dressed kind of light.
Oh.
And so it's not comfortable. They're not real comfortable. Now, the Franks, on the other hand, have a certain advantage in that because they're wearing armor. Now, it's not the full plate armor that we think of nowadays, but they had chainmail armor and a steel helmet. But in order to protect their bodies against the blows that would come against the mail armor, which would stop a blade, in order to protect their bodies, they also wore another set of clothing underneath the chain mail, which was actually a quilt. Oh. So if you can imagine, here they are in October, it's a freezing day, and you've got one army wearing quilts, down comforters, and the other one wearing pajamas.
Right,
you know?
right.
So you had a certain advantage there. There's also another advantage that the Franks had also, and this has been rather controversial throughout history, the history of technology, but they had introduced a stirrup on their horses, and what that meant was that they would then be able to slip their everybody wears rides a horse with stirrups now, but at the time this was quite novel, and what they did was they slipped their feet into those stirrups, which were attached to their saddle, so that they could stand up and actually fight standing up on top of a horse, or for that matter, when their horse ran up against somebody else, they wouldn't get tossed off. There's a historian, I think he's still alive, but he was very popular in the 1960s and 70s out in California at UCLA. His name is Lynn Witt. It's Lynn, and it's White. And he popularized the idea that this stirrup changed the history of the world. Well, he's been argued since then. People have said, oh, no, it's not that important. But I don't know. I think an awful lot. For one thing, definitely, this little stirrup saved that battle. And that battle is considered to be one of the 15 decisive battles of history. So, I mean, things would have been different if this army had won. Well, what happened was they attacked. They came across the field. The Arabs came across the field, and the Muslims, rather, and they slammed up against this solid rock of Frankish knights, and they disintegrated. And with that, they fell back again with the intention of another charge, but instead, the Franks then charged on them. Now, the charges... you have to keep in mind that these are big horses. They're carrying men with armor on. So a charge is about 5 to 8 miles an hour. They're not exactly speeding at each other. But nonetheless, the Franks were irresistible. They could not be stopped, and they swept the Arab cavalry right off. I keep saying Arab. They're
the Muslim.
Muslim, yeah. Muslim cavalry right off of the battlefield. And with that, they captured all of the supplies, the supply train that the Muslims had, the impedimenta. And so they captured all of the treasures that had been stolen from these various cities. They captured all the food, all the supplies, and also later that day they also found the body of Al-Rahman on the battlefield. He had been killed on the battle. This is the Battle of Tours. And this is the turning point. This is the northernmost expedition of Islam. And with that, they failed to secure the heartland of France. Now, raids would continue on, as we'll see. Raids will continue on, certainly after Charlemagne. But Charlemagne counterattacks. Now, he's a descendant of Charles Martel, and later on, he will move a Frankish army down on the other side of the Pyrenees, at least for a short while, to try to buffer that zone down there. But here, once again, that failure in France, the Battle of Tours, did not discourage the Muslims. They continued on out of North Africa, taking ships and going to Sicily. And little by little, they succeeded in conquering Sicily, so that by 902, the last of the Byzantine soldiers were pulled out. And the population there, the Christian population, basically came under Muslim control. Wow. They then turned their attention to southern Italy, and it took the city of Benevento and marched up through the boot of Italy to Campania, south of Rome itself. We'd already seen later on, remember, where Rome itself is taken by these raiding parties. There's one group that actually formed like a camp or a fortress in the wooded area around Monte Argento, and there they continued for 20 years. They lived there for 20 years making raids into different parts of Italy. So anytime anybody let their guard down in Italy, you could expect to have a Muslim raiding party coming at you. This was, and it wasn't until 1000 AD that these guys were rooted out. You know, and it took Norman knights to do it.
Wow.
And remember, these are the generations following the Vikings. You know, after they were Christianized, then eventually they made their way down to southern Italy and succeeded in doing this. First of all, beating the Muslims, and then the Byzantines turn around and go, "Oh, thank you very much. We're coming back." And the Normans go, "Oh, no, you're not." So they beat them too. And eventually you end up with the establishment of a Norman kingdom in Sicily, in southern Italy, which we'll see a little bit later on, is really strange. I mean, you know, you don't think of Scandinavians, you know, maybe vacationing in Sicily, but you don't think of them, you know, calling Sicily home.
Home.
Yeah. Well, Spain is another story, and I'd like to take a look at that. Jump back a little bit first about the actual conquest of Spain by the Muslims themselves. And Spain is part of the incredible spread of Islam that takes place very rapidly, shortly after the death of Muhammad, and following after that the four caliphs. Now, in our next episodes, next programs, we're going to be looking at who Muhammad is, what did he teach, what's in the Quran, how does this inspire a billion, 0.3 people today, what happens after the Prophet dies, who takes over. We'll see the four caliphs that do this, the spread of Islam, the coming of dynasties, okay, and all of those sorts of things. But so we'll be going back in history again. But I want to stay in Spain right now to show the Muslim havoc that's taking place in Christian Europe.
Okay.
A lot of times, you know, you'll hear this thing that the Crusades were an aggressive war against Islam. That you can only say that if you forget the first 300 years before the Crusades, 400 years before the Crusades take place. This is not a peaceful conversion by any means. And by the way, I should mention also, it's not necessarily conversion. In some cases, the people who are conquered will be converted. In other cases, they're not, and they're not forcibly converted. They can make life, the Muslim leaders can make life very difficult for them, but not necessarily are there forced conversions under certain circumstances. Anyway, you have this spreading out of Islam across Arabia and then across Egypt, and as early as 697, the city of Carthage itself falls. Now, that's a wake-up call for the other Christians living along the North African coast. Remember, this is the land of St. Monica and St. Augustine. You know, this is, and you know, all these, so many of the great Western fathers called North Africa their home.
Oh, right.
And now, town after town, city after city, diocese after diocese is being gobbled up. And finally, after the fall of Carthage, this is over in Tunisia now, the North Africans and the Byzantines get serious, and so they've combined an army together. It's a Byzantine army along with a Berber army. These are Berbers are North Africans, and they formed around Tunis, okay, and there are a couple defeats. There's a victory here and there. The Byzantines succeed in a naval victory, which is able to clear the Western Mediterranean for a short while. Then the Berbers lose a victory. When the Muslim army then finally conquers the Berber North African army, one of the things that they did was they began a process of fraternization. So rather than like kill the defeated soldiers or whatever, they welcomed them into their own army.
Okay.
They fed them. They became friends with them, and as a result, the Berbers converted very quickly over to Islam. Keep in mind that many of them were Arianists. They're followers of Arius, and so their understanding of Christ is different from the Orthodox understanding of Christ, and they were very quick in accepting the Islamic understanding of Jesus, right, as the second to the greatest prophet.
Right.
Well, we'll settle for that. And so they do. And as a result, as early as 703, North Africa is basically cleared of Christianity. Those North Africans who were thoroughly Latinized, like Augustine had been and Monica, fled out of North Africa to Sicily, where they were again overtaken, or to Spain, trying to find some kind of solace there. Now comes on a scene of a very powerful governor in North Africa, and particularly his commander. His military commander is a man by the name of Tariq. Okay, his name is Musa ibn Nusayr, and he commands Tariq to take an army and cross over the little narrow strait between North Africa and Spain. Now, as you know, there's a little island peninsula in between there, the Rock of Gibraltar, right? And this is the interesting thing, is that when they arrive over there, they take that rock and then they go on to the mainland. There are some 7,000 Berbers who are now invading Spain. Spain is a very complex region. It's being ruled by the Goths. They've been there for about 200 years. But although they've been there about 200 years, they've never really assimilated well with the local population that was there, the Roman Spaniards who were there, and there are still Celtic groups that go back to when before the Romans arrived. So it's a very complex kind of a place, and so 7,000 Berbers arrive, and they take the rock, which the Muslims called the Gebel, and they named the Gebel after Tariq, and dropped the Eek, and ended up with Tar, Gebel Tar, Gibraltar. And that's how we get the word Gibraltar to today.
Oh my goodness, okay.
Yeah. And so he lands his 7,000 men, and he gets reinforcements of another 5,000 men. And with this begins marching his way into the Visigoth kingdom of Spain. The Visigoth king, a man by the name of Roderick, tries to pull together an army. But when he does, he finds that all of his allies have deserted him. And probably he himself, in a very valiant effort to save Spain, dies in battle with a very small army at his side. The Muslims then begin marching throughout Spain, and as they come, they portray themselves as liberators from the Goths. I remember I said that the Goths had not assimilated well with the other populations, and so they were heavy-handed. Mm-hmm. Here's a religious situation too. Here you had the Visigoths themselves were Arians, and so they oppressed the Orthodox Christians within Spain. And so when the Muslims arrived, first thing they did was they said, "Oh, people of the book, oh." And our wonderful Jewish friends. And so the Jewish populations of Spain, and there was a considerable population, welcomed them. Besides this, the Celts welcomed them. The Gypsies welcomed them. And so it's only going to be in Gothic strongholds that there's going to be resistance. But one stronghold after another, you get very rapidly, this army is conquering. By the next June, the governor himself, Musa ibn Nusar, arrives with 18,000 soldiers.
Wow.
And added to the 12,000 already there. And they make a beeline for the city of Sevilla, okay, which is an ancient Roman city as well as a Gothic site. That city is conquered. Eventually, it revolts against the Muslims. It's reconquered again, and it is finally totally in Muslim hands by 773.
Wow.
Yeah. Now we are at the beginning where we started. It's there you have the conquest of southern Spain, central Spain. Seville is now in their hands. And now they take this tiny little army to march up to the very top and finish off what's left of the Christians, where you have the Battle of Covadonga.
Okay.
While the conquests are happening, there is also the establishment of what's called the Caliphate of Cordova. So in the city of Cordova, you have the central administration. Okay?
Okay.
And this administration then is going to establish everything, southern Spain and central Spain, under its control. And it's going to be very tolerant of other religions. Mainly because it has to. There is never a critical mass of Muslims in Spain to really Islamize the country. It's too varied. Also, the other thing that's important about Spain is that it's also varied in geography. And if you could imagine this, if you could imagine the Iberian Peninsula, that is Spain and Portugal, as a series of boundaries going from north to south, you could see how it is difficult for the Muslims to conquer much further north from the Douro River. And at the same time, it becomes a stepping stones, one after another, of the Reconquista that will only end with the fall of Granada in 1492 at the hands of the Christians. So let's take a look at the geography of Spain.
Okay.
Okay, and I see you got your map in
I
front of
do.
you there. Sometimes it's a big help.
It does help.
Yeah. So look at the upper right-hand portion, or the uppermost portion, and there you've got the Pyrenees Mountains. Oh, these very, very rugged mountains, hard to get across. You can get an army across, but it's not an easy thing. And north of that, of course, is the area of southern France. Okay, then go down a little bit further as you're going south from the Pyrenees, and then you have the Cantabrian Mountains. Now that's that strip of mountains that runs around 30 miles south of Astoria, and that's that region there where the launching pad for the reconquest of Spain takes place. Go down another 60 miles, and you have the Douro River. See that there, and that acts as a barrier also. And really, Muslim influence, permanent influence, never really gets beyond there. Okay, then you go another step down, and in some areas it's only 20 miles wide. Some areas it's about 50 miles wide. And there's a mountain range there called the Guadarrama Mountains, and then over in the east side, you see there's another river that runs east and west called the Ebro River. Boy, that's a very important river in ancient Roman times. That's the river that Hannibal launched his attack on Italy from beyond the Ebro River. Go down further, there's another river called the Tagus River. And you go down further, there's a mountain range called the Sierra Moreno. And then further down near the coast, there's the Sierra Nevada River mountains, the Sierra Nevada mountains. And so what you have is that the history of the Christian Reconquista of Spain is literally a movement from one of these barriers to the next, slowly taking one after another. However, this is not going to be an easy matter, and literally, for hundreds of years, you're going to be dealing with piracy and brigandage. As much as the Caliphate of Cordova is trying to maintain control over southern Spain, it has very little control over these, well, basically they're Muslim pirates who are pretty much raiding on their own. And while they'll raid other lands, they really kind of have a preference for raiding Christian lands. Okay. And they also have a wonderful ship called a Corsair that attacks throughout the Mediterranean region and raids the coasts. It is a light draft, although it's a seagoing ship, it's light draft, so that it can get into the deeper rivers and actually go into the interior. There's one case in which in 842, a navy of these Muslim pirates actually made their way up the Rhone River through southern France as far as the city of Arles. And they also discovered, as they were making these raids on the southern coast of France, now nowadays we think of that as the Riviera and all that, but that was, if you lived along that area, you were in trouble. At any particular moment, these guys might appear and come in and snatch whatever you have, whatever cattle you have, your children, your wife, whatever, kill you and take off with the rest for slaves. And so life was really difficult in that part there. And also a group of these Muslim brigands discovered a wonderful peninsula down in that area that they made a camp. It's called the Frenay, and it's much like the camp that was made in Monte Argento in Italy. It was a place that you could raid from and send out attacks. These particular pirates and brigands had lots of experience back in Spain in mountain ranges. And so they're not afraid of mountains, and they kind of like it actually because it helps them to raid in small mountaineering parties. And especially their favorite target were Christian monasteries. They knew they could get in, they knew that they weren't armed, and they knew that the monks wouldn't defend themselves, and then they would just go in and take whatever they wanted. And if they wanted to, just kill whoever they wanted. Now, this is so incredible. I mean, as I was doing all of this reading, I was reading about different raids that had taken place. And in one case, in 940 A.D., there was a Muslim raid that had come out of the Western Mediterranean all the way to the Rhine River in Germany.
Wow. And
they sacked the monastery of St. Gall. That's absolutely incredible. I mean, talk about audacious. Yeah. Christian resistance, well, you couldn't turn to the Eastern Empire. The Byzantine Empire was practically useless. They had a fleet they sent around, but the fleet was so slow that by the time the Corsairs had gotten in, did what they wanted, the fleet shows up a week later. So that wasn't of much use at all. The people in the area begged the Christian Empire of Byzantium to attack La Frenay, wipe those guys out. They wouldn't touch it. At one point, they turned to the Holy Roman Empire and said, could you do something? The King of France could do nothing. Could you do something? And this was the Emperor Otto I. Now, he's a pretty powerful character, and we'll see later on, plays a very important role. All he could do was write a letter to the Caliph of Cordova saying, would you please do something about disciplining your people? Nothing. So, there you go. And this continues on for centuries. And they finally went too far in 972. A raiding party had made its way into the St. Bernard Pass in Switzerland. And they came across a party of monks who were traveling. And it just so happened that among that group was the abbot of the monastery of Cluny. plays a very important role in history. His name is Brother Magyars, and he is a very respected man. All the abbots of Cluny are either respected or saints or both. And he himself is very respected. He is a confessor of many of the dukes and kings and bishops and all people. He was like the St. John Vianney of his day. Yeah. And so and the single most important individual in that area was he was also the confessor to the Duke, or rather the Count of Provence, man by the name of William of Provence. And when word came to William of Provence that Brother Magyars had been captured, along with that word came that the Muslim raiders were willing to ransom the monks back for a large sum of money. And Count William was so upset with this. I mean, it's one thing to go ahead and raid cities and take crops and steal treasures and stuff like that, but these are holy monks. Mm-hmm. Don't you have any respect for religion? Well, Count William decided he was going to teach them a little lesson, and so he sent word all throughout southern France, come and join me. Let's do a Charles Martel on these guys. And hundreds and hundreds of knights showed up. Now, this is going to be one of those examples of what feudalism. This is where feudalism works. And these guys show up, heavily armored, the whole works, and they then joined Count William, who then he took a raid and raided La Fresnaye and wiped out the Muslim stronghold there. He did it himself. An important lesson. Can't rely on kings, can't rely on emperors, can't rely on Byzantines. You got to do it yourself. Sometimes you just have to form a neighborhood association. You know? And in a sense, that's what he's done. Later on, we're going to see that that's the grounding behind feudalism. Okay. Is basically neighborhood associations. Well, what happens then is now that the Muslims have been run out of La Fresnaye, then they move their operations offshore. In the Western Mediterranean, there's a set of islands there called the Balearic Islands, Minorca and Majorca. You might see where those are. And they continued their raids into southern France, but this time from a greater distance, because these knights are not seagoing people. You know, and so they get away with a lot of that. Again, they make a raid on Marseille, the city of Marseille in southern France, and this is in 1178. The city is attacked. Now, remember that the first crusade is called in 1095. So this is kind of late into history. Wow. They're finally put in check when some of the Italian city-states along that coast of the Tyrrhenian Sea formed an alliance, put together a navy, and began defending the coastline. This is Pisa, Genoa, and Amalfi. Okay. And ultimately, they're able to even conquer the island of Sardinia and return Sardinia to Christianity. Now, you know, before we jump back into this, I want to make two rather modern observations. Okay. You remember the life of St. Vincent de Paul, when he had received that small inheritance, and he had gone to receive it at Marseille and was traveling by sea in the same region, right? But how many hundreds of years later, 500-600 years later, remember that there's a Muslim raiding party that captures him, and for the next couple of years, he's enslaved. Right. Okay? Even more contemporary, remember the Barbary pirates. Right. In American history, American shippers, when they went into the Mediterranean, found themselves being attacked, and eventually, since we couldn't afford to pay the ransom, we decided that we were going to take them out. So the War of the Barbary Pirates, you're talking about the same group of people. They'd have been around for 1,000 years, you know. And this still is contemporary. I mean, you know, we have cases of piracy, especially in South Asia, in around Indonesia. There was just a couple months ago, there was some films taken of a pirate attack. There was a group of Muslims attacking a cruise ship. Yeah. 2005.
I think that was a wake-up call for a lot of people.
Yeah, I sure hope so.
I hope so, right.
Yeah. So anyway, this is a problem that the Christian Europe had pretty seriously for a long period of time. You know, you could say, well, it's like swatting at flies and things like that, but these flies were stealing people, ransoming people, killing people, and it was constant. You had to constantly be aware of this. So even as Western Europe, then Christian Europe, is being swamped in North Africa, in Spain, raids taking place by Muslims into France and Italy, and even into southern Germany. Okay? As if that's not enough, now here comes this other group out of central Russia, the Magyars. Somewhere out of the Russian steppes, without any kind of warning, there is this group of nomads. And we don't know a lot about them. They had a very different language from the other peoples who were there. They did share a culture of horse breeding. They literally lived on their horses. They hunted, they fished on their horses. They were equestrian warriors in one of the great traditions of others that had come out of those steppes. To show how close they are with the horses, that children, babies, were weaned on mare's milk.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah. So they appear in Europe actually about 5 years before Tariq comes to Gibraltar. And so at the same time that you have a Muslim army attacking Gibraltar in southern Spain, you also have, way on the other side of Europe, way on the Danube River, you have the Magyars storming in. And eventually they're going to take over what is today Hungary. Okay, they actually take in much more than that. At one time, they took in part of Austria and Hungary. Eventually, they're going to settle down, like the land they have there. They're going to become agriculturalists, but they're also going to continue setting raiding parties to the north and to the west and to the south. They reach Germany itself by 862, raiding parties. In 899, they cross the Alps and attack northern Italy. So you can imagine, if you're an Italian, let's say you're a pope in Rome, and you're seeing all of southern Italy being ravaged by these Muslims, and now all of a sudden, here come these Hungarians coming in from the north. It is just absolute bedlam. In 900, there is a huge raid that goes throughout Bavaria and just burns. The whole duchy of Bavaria is just in flames. And then after that, every year, during the raiding season, we're talking about spring and summer, huh?
Right.
You've got in Germany, Italy, in France, in southern France, Burgundy, in eastern France, Lorraine, year after year, these Magyars are going to come in. And so, everything's destroyed. You start your life all over again in autumn. You try to plant some crops for overwinter. You try to fix your house up so that you can survive the winter. Next spring, ta-da, here they are again. And it's just unending. And you can't send for help. There's no 911 back then.
Uh-huh.
You got to rely on yourself. And of course, they love to attack monasteries. Didn't take long before the Magyars realized that monasteries were nice places to attack too. Or they would attack weak villages. Or they would find out that there is a region where there's been a change in leadership, and especially if the new leader is the widow or maybe the infant son, and boy, they attack those too. Often the Magyars would come through, and as they would come into an area, they would slaughter all the adult men, just kill them all. And then they would take, and older women, and then they would take the young women and boys, and then they would rape the young women and then sell them and the boys as slaves. They would take them down to the Danube River and then literally bring them down the Danube River down toward the Black Sea, where there would be Greek traders who would slave trade these Christians from Central Europe. And so here, the untold stories of some little German boy, little Hans, and he's out in the forest hunting rabbits one day, and all of a sudden he's swept up by these Hungarians, and what happens 3 months later? He's down on the Black Sea being sold as a slave to who knows what, and that's his life. So it gets to the point where the Europeans have to organize themselves to defend themselves. And here's that accounting that I'm talking about. We'll see that. Later on I want to talk about the coming of feudalism and how it happens and how the Europeans come to defend themselves. But also along this lines is the role of the church. Because the church, and I'm talking about some monolithic institution here, I'm talking about individuals with names and men and women who put their lives on the line in order to spread Christianity. Because as much as secular rulers see these guys coming in and they're the enemy and they're raiding parties and they're ravaging everything, there are monks and there are nuns and there are holy Christian men and women who look upon them as being misguided souls who need to be brought to Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And so in that sense, that's where Christian Europe goes on the offensive, not to kill them, but to convert them. And so the church, and here we do look at the institutional church. The institutional church sets up a diocese in a forward position, mm-hmm. out close to them. Now, that's the last thing you would think of, wouldn't it? I mean, these guys are pretty bad. I'd be running. I'd be as far away as I could. Right. I don't know where I'd run, though,
because you've got them coming from all sides.
Yeah, really, yeah. But anyway, they didn't. And
Who's the worst?
Yeah, and what they did was they took the Archdiocese of Salzburg, beautiful Austrian city today, and they set up a new diocese within the Archdiocese of Salzburg, the Diocese of Passau. Okay. And from there, you would then begin to receive missionaries. And I'm going to say a little bit more about this a little bit later on. And I want to do a little survey of Europe, what it looks like. But the key here in the East is going to be one Hungarian who's going to be converted. And he's converted through an Italian, a man by the name of Gerard. And Gerard is sent to Passau. And from there he's told, go to Hungary and convert this king. And the man who sends him is the Pope. His name is Pope Sylvester II, one of the most incredible people of the Middle Ages. We'll talk about him later on, too. He was Pope in the year 1000. And so he sends Gerard, later on St. Gerard, okay, and St. Gerard arrives in Hungary, is so impressive upon the king that the king converts. And the king then sets his life toward converting the Hungarian nation. This is King Stephen I. And ultimately, as a way of thanking King Stephen, the Pope then commissions a special iron crown, which is then sent. It's the crown of Saint Stephen, which is sent to King Stephen as a sign of thank you. One of the things Saint Gerard does too, very, very brilliantly, is that he establishes a cathedral school in Hungary itself, and then begins to encourage Hungarian vocations. There's going to be a problem with that because many of the Germans back in Germany want to convert the Hungarians, but they want to do it with German monks and German monasteries, and we'll do this the German way, you know. And here's this Italian that makes an end run around them and says, no, we're going to do this the right way. We're going to do it through indigenous vocations. And so you end up with this terrible people becoming one of the great mainstays of the church. You know?
That's a beautiful, beautiful thought.
Yeah. So do we have time for a real quickie survey of the territory?
I think so.
If you were to take a look, one of the authors I came across referred to this as the darkest of ages. So you got if this is the dark ages, this is the darkest of the dark ages. Okay, and it runs from around 850 to 1000 AD, about 150 years. So let's just real fast survey Christendom from the west to the east.
Okay.
All the way to the west, you've got the Irish monks. Here is great Christianity. Here is great learning, some of the great libraries. But Ireland is under huge stress from the Vikings, specifically from the Danes. And they even established their own kingdom in Eastern Ireland. And they establish a port city that becomes the capital of their kingdom. It's called Dublin. Dublin is not founded by the Irish. It's actually founded by the Danes.
Oh my gosh.
However, after generations of being oppressed by these people, being attacked by them, being killed by them, many of the monasteries had to establish what they called round towers. These are not very big towers, but they're very, very high, and they're made of stone, and there's only one entrance, and it's up at the top of the tower. And so how do you get there? You have a ladder. And the monks would climb this ladder. When they heard a Danish raid was coming, they would climb to the top, and they would then pull the ladder inside.
Oh.
And there they would have to hold out as long as the Danes were around. And then when the Danes left, then they'd come back down. It was really, really dangerous. And this went on until finally the Danish king was baptized in 943. Wow. So the Irish have been under so much persecution so long, and even in the Middle Ages. Over in Scotland, same kind of a deal. You have the conversion of the Picts and the Scots, and then they're united under the leadership of their first king, Kenneth MacAlpin. But then you have raids again by the Danes. The Scots defeat them. But for the most part, they're cut off from Europe. There's a terrible Danish raid that takes place in 986. That's kind of late, in which the great monastery of Iona is destroyed and all the monks slaughtered. In England, again, you have some great leadership. There's a young man by the name of Egbert, who in 800 leaves the court of Charlemagne. He's been living with Charlemagne for 13 years. The year that Charlemagne is made Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope, he goes back to England and becomes king of the Saxons, of the West Saxons, unites together the 7 kingdoms of England, builds up the church around the archdiocese, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and then Danish raids. The Danes are defeated by King Alfred the Great, but he dies in 900. Many of the Danes are converted as a result of Alfred the Great. And then you have Alfred also bringing the churches in Wales and Ireland closer to union with the Archbishop of Canterbury, which is nice, except if you are a follower of Armagh, the Diocese of St. Patrick. But anyway, that's another story. Then things fall apart for the English. More raids. There's a conflict within England itself. There's a king. His name is Edwig. He's an evil man. One of the great religious figures of the day is Abbot Dunstan of Glastonbury, later on the Archbishop of Canterbury. He's exiled, is able to come back only by the efforts of the next good king. This is Edward the Martyr, King Edward, who himself is murdered in 979. That's why he's known as King Edward the Martyr. And he is succeeded by another fool. His name is Ethelred. And his nickname in history is Ethelred the Unready. because the Danes attacked him when he wasn't looking. England's in bad shape. We've already seen in Spain, bad shape. Church after church was converted into mosques. The Archbishop of Toledo in 859 was murdered by the Muslims. Well, we've seen already the beginnings of the Reconquista. In fact, interestingly enough, central Italy is known as Castile, and from the Spanish word Castilla, and it means castle, because the whole area is built with Christian castles. The deal is that every time the Christians retake land, they build a castle, so they never lose anything. It's just slow taking, little by little. In Italy, we've seen already chaos, Muslim raids, Hungarian raids. The emperor is not much help. The Eastern emperor is not much help. Pope John IX made a tour of Italy, and he wrote to the emperor up in Aachen, and he said, "I would rather die than see what I just saw again." It's that bad. There is very little stability. At one point, the Lombard dukes actually ally with the Muslims against other Christian rulers. Rome is only saved by the Leonine walls, which we've talked about, Pope Leo having built those up. We're going to see two terrible families dominate Rome and dominate the papacy. We'll see that a little bit later on. In France, civil wars. Power really rests with dukes, not with kings, but with dukes. The Duke of Aquitaine, of Toulouse, of Burgundy, of Flanders, later on of Normandy. In 996, one man, Hugh Capet, is going to take the city of Paris and begin building the Kingdom of France. In Germany, the same scene. Dukes. Duke of Franconia, of Swabia, of Bavaria, of Lotharingia. Eventually, they're going to be pulled together by the Duke of Saxony. His name is Henry. Nickname is the Fowler, because he's a big bird guy, like to hunt with birds. And he's going to be the man who is going to save Germany from the Magyars on the one hand and the Danes on the other. He's going to pull off a double victory in 934. And with that, he will bring together the dukedoms into a renovated Holy Roman Empire of the German nation. And he'll set up this empire for his successor, his son, Otto I. Okay. When you get further into the hinterlands to the north and the east, you've got efforts like by people like the Benedictine St. Msgr, who is going to become the Archbishop of Hamburg, and then work the North Sea, converting, slowly beginning to convert the Vikings. Though the Vikings really will be converted from the English. We'll see. It's a very interesting story later on. To the east, the great missionaries of Cyril and Methodius. They had a cushy life in a nice monastery in Greece and Thessalonica. They go to convert the Slavs. And by doing that, they take the Slavonic alphabet and rewrite it. That's why it's called the Cyrillic alphabet, because it's after St. Cyril. And with that, they were able to translate the Bible into Slavic languages. You have another, the German church, as I say, holds out against the North Sea and eventually is going to be trying to convert there. In Bohemia, you're going to have a convert of one who had studied under St. Methodius, and he's going to convert Bohemia to Christianity. And his name is Wenceslaus. He's the Czech king, okay? And he is murdered. He is martyred by his own brother. In 935, his brother kills him. And he then, of course, becomes Saint Wenceslaus. But this is only a temporary setback. There's the bishop of Prague. His name is Adalbert. Is going to work very hard. First of all, he's going to give up and go to Rome and retire. The Pope's going to turn around and say, what are you doing? Get back up there and do what you're supposed to do. Adalbert gets the courage to go back, and eventually he, in 997, is martyred also. But St. Adalbert then builds upon St. Wenceslaus, and the Bavarian people are then converted. So here we have then a moment in history when things are really, really tense, and yet there are these little tiny signs of hope.
All right. Looks like we need them there.
Yeah.
Okay,
right.
Father, we are at the end of the hour, so can we just get a blessing from you?
Sure. May Almighty God bless you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen. Thank you, Father.
Okay.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.